que sobran de la danza tuya y mía. Levantarlos para decir ya vas. Ni África ni América Latina se subas. Con barro, con casco, con lápiz a patear el fiasco. Provocar un social terremoto en escucharte. صار الوضع بده الردع لكل كثير بتحرر مستوطن بتلمد لكن يوصف حكاية ألف كان ألف راق بالهد دار الإعلام سلاح مطيب فبركون أما لما ألمي يا دين برجع الواقع كما todos los callados todos los sometidos todos los invisibles todos los callados todos los sometidos todos los invisibles saqueo, pisoteo, colonización, Matías, Catrileo, Gualmapo. 1000 veces venceremos, del cielo al suelo y del suelo al cielo vamos. Caballito blanco, vuelve pa' tu pueblo, no te tenemos miedo, tenemos vida y fuego. Fuego en nuestras manos, fuego en nuestros ojos, tenemos tanta vida y esta fuerza color rojo. La niña María no quiere tu castigo, se va a liberar con el suelo palestino. Somos africanos, latinoamericanos, somos este sur y juntamos nuestras manos. Todos los callados.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Weekly Pan-African News. I'm a little low energy. I'm a little tired. But happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here too. I'm with you on that low energy frequency. Yes. We gonna get pumped up though.
Yes, talking about this subject. But I have a lozenge in my mouth also because I'm trying to build up that immunity and elderberry lozenge because the cases are spiking here in New Mexico. It's really scary. So yeah, trying to boost my immune system, trying to see if I can inoculate myself so that I can keep doing this work and not get COVID. We'll see how it goes. Also,
yes,
hi Bird.
I could find elderberry. I found some too. Me and my son been doing elderberry too and vitamin C. Yep, keep that immune system up. Same
thing. I stocked up a few months ago because I was like, it's probably gonna be hard to find. When I found it, I got a couple, we all should. Also, Bird's in the comments saying love the music. So the song that I played at the beginning is a song called Somos Sur by Anna Tiju, who I think she's like from Chile, but she's a hip hop artist, and the song is basically about like Africa, Asia, Central and South America, Palestine, all coming together to smash U.S. imperialism, to chase out the U.S. and win their land back and win their freedom. And I really like it because she's like, yeah, that's what needs to happen. Colonized people around the world need to unite to destroy U.S. imperialism. That's the only way it's going to get taken out. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate that song for the message. And I also like that we have a theme song now. So, yeah. But anyway, my name is Onya Sanwu. This is my comrade Monica. Say hi, Monica. And we are members of All African People's Revolutionary Party, New Mexico. We are a revolutionary Pan-African socialist party. We're going to explain in detail what that means on this week's show topic. But this is Weekly Pan-African News. We do it every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. We started doing it in March, so it's been like quite some time. We started at the beginning of the pandemic because we realized it would no longer be safe for our community, the African community, for us to do in-person events because of this raggedy virus. And so we were like, how can we keep talking to people? How can we keep building with people? How can we keep, putting our message out into the world and raising the consciousness of our people? And we're like, let's do a weekly show. So yeah, we've been doing this for a few months. Every single episode, we have a different political education topic that we explore because you will not find an AAPRP event without some element of political education. Like Malcolm X always said, you cannot organize a sleeping people. You have to wake them up, and then you get some action. So this show is how we're helping to wake our people up. So there's a couple of things that we always start off with every episode. First thing is an acknowledgement of the land that we're on. We are speaking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory. The Tiwa Pueblo are the rightful owners of this land. The settlers call it Albuquerque. It is Tiwa land. It will always be Tiwa land. It is their land no matter how long settlers have laid claim to it. And they will get their land back. When we say land back, we mean land back. They're going to get their land back. We're getting our land back in Africa. Palestine will get their land back all over the world. So that's it. First, land acknowledgement. This is Tiwa land, period, full stop. And then the second thing that we always do on every show is that we call in an African ancestor. And the reason why we do that is because the work that we are doing as Revolutionary Pan-Africanists, as socialists, is built on the soldiers of the people that came before us. Like, we as African people would not even be able to do this work in this context, in the snakes, without the struggles and knowledge and labor and sacrifice of the people that came before us, of our ancestors. Everything that we are as African women, as African people, is because of our ancestors, because of the masses of our people. And so calling in an ancestor is a way to ground ourselves in that reality, to acknowledge that reality, to uplift the work of the people that prepared the ground for us to fight, and also to make sure that they're not forgotten or misrepresented by this society that constantly lies on African people and on our heroes and on our land. So the ancestor we're going to call in today is Muammar Gaddafi, and I always butcher his name, but I bet you recognize Gaddafi because I bet you've heard a lot of shit on the news that's not true about that particular man. But this week, actually on October 20th, which was Monday, is the anniversary of his murder by the U.S. government during the illegal invasion of Libya under President Barack Obama that was spearheaded by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. There's a very, very, very famous interview of Hillary Clinton, I believe on 60 Minutes, where she's talking about the murder of Gaddafi, and I'm not going to get into the details because it's extremely violent and triggering, but the way they killed him was disgusting. And so she was aware of that. There's video. And so on 60 Minutes, she was asked a question about that, and she made a joke. She made a joke because she's a ghoul. She said, we came, we saw, he died. We brutally murdered that man in a lynch mob. And in the aftermath of that illegal U.S. invasion of Libya, obviously the slave trade has returned to Libya. African people are being bought and sold in Libya because the state collapsed after the U.S. invaded. Libya had previously been one of the wealthiest and most stable countries in Africa that was moving towards a socialist system of government where everybody had resources provided for thanks to the revenue from Libya's oil reserves that were nationalized. So people had housing, healthcare, education, a monthly stipend. It was one of the most stable and peaceful places in Africa. And then also, the other really important thing about Gaddafi is that he was a Pan-Africanist. He had a vision of a unified, liberated Africa, and he used the resources of Libya and his position as president of Libya to fight for Pan-Africanism on the continent. That's why they killed him. He was trying to form one African currency. He allowed Libya to be used as a base area, as a liberated zone for revolutionaries from around the world, not just African revolutionaries, but Irish revolutionaries, Palestinians, people engaged in struggle all around the world went to Libya to meet with each other and be in community and build the struggle. That was the space that we had. And the United States destroyed that stable African nation, murdered that man, and killed the last free zone, the last liberated zone in Africa. So despite what you may have heard about that man, we hold him up as a revolutionary Pan-Africanist, as a man who used his position to contribute to our struggle, We reject any kind of like morality, like argument about morality raised by the U.S. government about really anyone, because this government has no room whatsoever to speak about anyone's behavior. They had no right whatsoever. Yeah, like it's just like, who the hell are you? Look what you've done to us. Look what you've done to indigenous people.
Thank you so much for calling out what's going on in Libya and how none of that was happening before this government again, and under Obama. The more and more I learn about this man and what the negative contributions that he did and impacted our people, it's just continued capitalism, colonialism on our people, and like under Obama, right? Like you said, one of a liberated zone gone, and what's happening? Our people are being enslaved, and nobody's talking about how this country, the U.S., caused that.
Yep. With the partnership of NATO, as someone pointed out in the comments, the North Atlantic Trade Organization, which is basically like a military project, a joint military project between the U.S. and European powers. When Gaddafi was talking about forming an African currency backed by Libyan gold, it was France that was like, wait, that's not going to work for us, because if people don't know, France is a major colonizer of Africa to this day. The number one number of military bases in Africa is actually the U.S. The U.S. has the most, but the second most is France. France, like China's like way down the list. It's U.S. and then France, and then like Germany, and then another sort of other European states. But the reason why France has like this dominant military presence in Africa is because France colonized Africa. There's an entire section of West Africa known as Francophone Africa where they speak French. And not only do they speak French, but they were forced to use French currency in those nations. And in addition to that, they were forced to send a certain proportion of their GDP directly to French banks. Like France literally took a portion of these nations' wealth, like multiple African nations, and required them to be stored in a French bank. Gone. And so when Gaddafi was like, we want an African currency backed by African gold, that would have cut France out of the equation. So France was like, hell no. And they went to the United States, who has the same vested interest in making sure Africa remains submissive. And they were like, help us take this dude out. And the United States was like, word, because that's what they do. They collaborate to destroy free African nations. They collaborate to destroy African sovereignty. They collaborate to make sure that African remains oppressed and exploited. So yeah, and that's actually like a really good segue into our political education topic this week. So we have done like a series of interviews of revolutionary organizations that we really respect here in Albuquerque. And then after we wrapped that up, we were like, what can we do with the show to continue pushing our line forward, to continue educating people in like a structured way? And what we came up with was having like a series of like 101 type shows where we discuss like fundamental concepts about how we organize, about what we believe. So the first one we did was last week. We did what is revolutionary solidarity, using the example of Cuba and Africa. Cuba has showed up for Africa in ways that almost no other non-African nation has. Like when Africa was like, we need help chasing out these colonizers, we need arms, we need money, we need doctors, Cuba was like, word, let's go. Tell us what to do. So that's what we discussed last week. And so this week, we're going to be talking about an even more fundamental subject, and that is, what is revolutionary Pan-Africanism? When we say that we are a revolutionary Pan-African socialist organization, like, what does that mean? What is the objective? What are we trying to do? What do we believe? We're going to get into all of that on the episode today. And also, we're going to do it in 30 minutes, because we got to wrap this up.
Fast pace. So I'm just going to dive into about what is Pan-Africanism, and you'll see why there's the connection to Libya as well. And so what Pan-Africanism is as a people, our people are everywhere. Mm-hmm. And how are we connected as a people, whether you're in this country, whether you're in Africa, whether you're across the diaspora, and how we're connected. So Pan-Africanism calls for the unification of all of our people who are of African descent across the world. The main political objective is to have one unified socialist Africa, and that is also about the total liberation of our people everywhere. Because once Africa is free and liberated, all people will be free and liberated. Weird. And so Africa is the most resource land base, and Onyasabu is going to talk more about that. And that's why, like, the unification of our people has to happen in Africa because of what's happening globally, across the globe, and all the exploitation that occurs in Africa. So Pan-Africanism, what it does is it allows to destroy capitalism, imperialism, and all systems that oppress us. And it makes our people, we're a collective, right? Working toward one unified socialist Africa. So if you're African or African descent, if you're of African descent, you are African, meaning you are part of the Pan-Africanism agenda for our people to be liberated, total unification, in a socialist Africa.
Thanks, Monika. So yeah, exactly as Monika said, Pan-Africanism is a political objective, and that objective is one unified socialist Africa, uniting all African people in the continent, throughout the diaspora, in the United States, in the Caribbean, in Central America, in South America, all around that one political objective of one unified socialist Africa. The short way of saying why one unified socialist Africa is because when Africa is free, African people everywhere will be free. And I'm going to get into exactly why that is. So the APRP is a Pan-African organization. We are based in Africa. We were founded in Africa by Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first democratically elected president of the first nation to gain independence from European colonialism. That nation was Ghana. When Ghana gained independence, Kwame Nkrumah, in a speech on its Independence Day, its very first, was like the independence of Ghana is meaningless without the total liberation of Africa. And what he meant is that Ghana was an independent nation completely surrounded by colonized nations. Ghana had managed to liberate itself through a mass people's movement that elected Kwame Nkrumah, but the rest of Africa was still under the direct control of European colonial powers, just as now it's under the direct control of those same powers in addition to the United States. And so Kwame Nkrumah rightly recognized that if you are completely surrounded by enemy territory, it's only a matter of time before your independence is threatened. And that's actually precisely what happened in Ghana. After they started building socialism, after they nationalized all of Ghana's vast resources like cocoa, like rubber, like sisal, like all these, like gold, like all these elements that existed in Ghana, after they nationalized those resources, the United States was like, this isn't going to work. It's not going to work at all. We need access to this free. We need access to exploit you. And so the CIA overthrew Kwame Nkrumah. They overthrew yet another democratically elected government. And the only reason they did that is because the government was trying to use the resources of that nation for the people living there. But what the CIA did in Ghana proved Kwame Nkrumah correct. African people will not realize liberation until our homeland is free completely from any kind of foreign domination. Until our homeland is, in our resources and our land and also our labor is collectively controlled democratically by the masses of African people, until we can ensure through that collective control that those resources are used for our people, to make sure that our kids have access to good education, to make sure that we have healthcare, to make sure that we have housing, to make sure that we have safety. Until those resources are controlled by us and used for the right purposes, we are always going to be oppressed. We are always going to be exploited. We are always going to exist at the bottom of this society. And the reason for that is that the exploitation of Africa, the exploitation of African land, the exploitation of African resources spurs the global foundation of the entire economic system of capitalism. This entire global economic system is built on the exploitation of Africa. Folks probably already know that the reason why capitalism, like why the US became a world power, is because of the land that they stole from indigenous people and the labor they stole from African people. Like, it was quite literally the slave trade, enslaved African labor, that made the United States into a superpower. So most folks know that, or like people with sense know that. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that the exploitation of us and the exploitation of Africa did not stop with the transatlantic slave trade. They kept going back. They kept taking us. They took millions of African people out of the continent. And what that allowed them to do is weaken African nations, weaken African civilizations until such a point where you as foreign invaders could straight up go in and take the land, could straight up go in and take the resources, could straight up go in and form institutions of domination to make sure that African people and African resources remained under their control. And so what Pan-Africanism is seeking to do is to end that, to end that relationship of exploitation, to put Africa's resources, land, and labor back into the collective control of African people, to take it away from the capitalist system built on our backs. And so this would do two things. Just as Monica said, once Africa is unified and socialist and liberated, that is going to mean liberation for African people all around the world, because we're going to be able to use the vast wealth. Like, Africa is the most resource-rich landmass on the face of the planet. It's the highest concentration of the most valuable minerals required for all kinds of modern civilization are found in Africa, are stolen from Africa. And so when we take that out of the equation, not only is it helping our people, but it's also dealing a death blow to this global system of capitalism that exploits everybody. If capitalism can't get coltan or cobalt from the Congo to make the batteries that go into your electronic devices, like the battery in your laptop or your cell phone or your electric car or your Fitbit, if you have one of those, all of the batteries in those devices are made using a mineral called coltan. Coltan is found in vast quantities in the Congo, and it's mined by enslaved African children who then sell those minerals like through intermediaries to like Tesla and Google and Apple. So that's like one example. But like I said, there's vast quantities of all kinds of precious materials like oil, like gold, like coffee, like cocoa, like rubber, like bauxite, which is used to make stainless steel. All of these resources are found in high quantities in Africa, and the capitalist system depends on being able to steal them from Africa in order to keep going. And so when African people take that stuff back, when African people take back our resources, that means capitalism cannot use those resources. That is a death blow to the capitalist system, because again, this entire global economic system is built on the exploitation of Africa. Point blank period.
And as they're also stealing them, who do you think is picking them? Our people are enslaved. Children, from the youngest to the oldest, are picking all these resources. So they're not only just stealing them, they're enslaving and exploiting our people's labor, like Onyesawu said, and like murdering them as well at the same time.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. So I've been to Ghana, thanks to the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and Ghana is a major site of cocoa. Like, cocoa grows there naturally, and it's harvested on plantations. Yes, it's what it sounds like. And oftentimes working on those plantations is like African children under 18, sometimes as young as like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And a thing that I learned in Ghana while talking to the African people that worked on these plantations is that they will harvest this cocoa for transnational, corporations like Nestle, for example. And they will produce the raw material to develop the chocolate that's sold in supermarkets all over the United States and all over the world that we take for granted. It's like probably like $1, you eat it. But what I heard is that these children that harvest this cocoa on these plantations for slave wages very often have never tasted a chocolate bar. And why is that? Because it's too expensive for them to be able to afford. It's like a luxury product. So Nestle pays them like pennies on the dollar, right? To harvest the cocoa that they use to produce the chocolate bars that we shove into our faces here in the United States. And the children that are being exploited to harvest this cocoa don't even get to taste the chocolate because it's too expensive. They cannot afford it with the wages they are being paid by these massive transnational corporations. It is the exact same situation with coltan in the Congo. Companies, like I said, like Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, Google, who makes the fucking Priuses? Toyota. Sorry, excuse my language. All of these like major, massive U.S.-based corporations get their coltan from the Congo, and that coltan is mined by African children. You can actually look it up. There is a lawsuit in U.S. federal court right now filed by the parents of these children against these corporations, against Google, Apple, Tesla, Microsoft, saying that you are knowingly using the labor of enslaved African children who are being maimed and grievously injured and dying in these illegal mines. You are using their labor to get cheap access to coltan, and then you are selling this iPhone for like $1,000, and these kids get nothing. And that is the relationship that this system and also this empire, the United States, has to Africa. Slavery did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation. Slavery continues to this day. Slavery is like a fundamental part of how capitalism functions on a day-to-day basis. And who are the slaves? It's still African people. And it's also women and children in places like Southeast Asia, in places like the Middle East, and in places like Central and South America. Capitalism cannot function without massive exploitation, and the foundation of that exploitation is the exploitation of Africa and African people. So when Africa is free, African people everywhere will be free, and capitalism will have a major source of resources taken away, which means that the struggle to end capitalism for the whole world, the struggle to liberate humanity will be greatly advanced if Pan-Africanism is successful. So you're welcome. So yeah. So now I'm going to get briefly into like where did this idea come from? Like who came up with Pan-Africanism? How did this become the objective? What is its history of use? So very briefly, because we have 18 minutes. So first and foremost, important to understand is that Pan-Africanism as an idea was actually born in the diaspora. It was born in the Western Hemisphere. It was born as part of like a joint conversation between Africans in the Caribbean and Africans in the United States in places like Harlem and Chicago. People like Marcus Garvey, for example. Marcus Garvey is from Jamaica, but formed the United Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA, in the United States. And to this day, the UNIA is the largest organization of African people that has ever existed. Like to this day, it is the largest organization that we have ever had. And it was a Pan-Africanist organization. He was saying that we as African people must come together as African people, must recognize ourselves as African people, not as Americans, not as Negroes, not as coloreds, but as Africans tied to this continent with a great history and a great legacy and a great future that we can build collectively. The UNIA created a sense of shared identity for masses of African people on like four different continents. It created like a sense of pride in who we were, in a sense that our destiny would not have to be tied to the people that colonized us, the people that enslaved us. The UNIA tried to form a number of African-owned organizations that would have been run collectively, cooperatively, to create income for our people, to create income for the movement. They also had a Back to Africa component of the UNI program that those business ventures were meant to fund. But unfortunately, as is the case, whenever any time a colonized person rises up, especially if they're African, like the enemy's gonna have something to say, right? And so the US government worked to attack Marcus Garvey. They worked to attack the UNIA, and unfortunately that he was deported and exiled to Jamaica, and the organization fell apart shortly after. So he's one of the founders. He's one of like the foundations of Pan-Africanism as a concept, but other folks were involved. People like George Padmore, who was like kind of like a mentor to Kwame Nkrumah. People don't really know who he is because he's not someone who can be co-opted. You cannot co-opt George Padmore. You cannot misrepresent George Padmore, so they do not talk about him. People like W.B. Dubois, who founded one of the first Pan-African, like international Pan-Africanist gatherings. The first Pan-African Congress was organized by W.B. Dubois. And so W.B. Dubois is like also someone who is misrepresented, right? People tend to talk about him and say, like, focus on like the talented 10th. But it's really important to understand that W. Dubois lived for almost like 100 years. And the talented 10th came in like the first 30 years of his life. And then for the entire rest of his life, he was like, wait, that's wrong. We have to figure out how to liberate ourselves as African people. And the conclusion he ultimately came to was that there is not going to be like a small percentage of our people that's going to liberate us. What's going to need to happen is that all African people, particularly poor and working class African people, are going to have to take collective leadership to liberate ourselves. And what he ultimately realized is that leadership and that organizing had to happen with Africa at the center. We had to focus on the unification and liberation of Africa as the objective if we wanted to realize the liberation of African people. So W.B. Du Bois organized the first Pan-African Congress. That was the very first one. And then there continued to be congresses for years afterwards. There were 5 or 4 more. At the fifth one was the first Pan-African Congress that was held in Africa. And it was very, very different from the previous ones in that the previous congresses had been like kind of like academic, right? It was mostly like intellectuals, writers, like people who were more like the intellectual sphere. But the fifth Pan-African Congress, not only was it held in Africa, but the people who went were revolutionaries. People who were engaged in the active struggle against colonialism in Africa, who were like on the front lines of those struggles to liberate African nations from imperialism and, spot after spot after spot. There were youth, there were students, There were labor leaders. It was basically the people of the movement, like the organizers. W.B. Du Bois was there alongside Amy Jacques Garvey, who was Marcus Garvey's second wife. She helped organize the Fifth Pan-African Congress. And what that Congress achieved, like what they resolved at the end, was that the liberation of Africa could not be granted by an outside force. The liberation of Africa was only going to happen at the hands of African people. And the way that that liberation would be achieved was through a revolutionary socialist struggle. They realized that the capitalist system, the imperialist system, is why Africa was exploited. And so in order to end that exploitation, they needed to tear it down and build something better from the ground up. And that better was anti-colonial revolutionary socialism, Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. So that's like in a nutshell. I did that in 5 minutes. I'm quite impressed. but
that was really good.
But that's like a very brief history of Pan-Africanism. But if you go to the APIP International website, APIP-INTL, and I'll put it in the chat as well, you can actually find a lot more in-depth writing about the history I just laid out very, very quickly. But let's keep it moving to like talk about why, like what does Pan-African mean for us as African people? Like what is like the actual impact of winning this for us?
Like for me, what I think about is exactly what you just said, is like revolutionary, like organizing. I don't recall who said it, but they said like the oppressor is not going to gift us liberation, right? And something that we've also been saying, like we're not going to vote our way to liberation. The only way we are going to get there is as a people organizing it. And so what I think about of what Pan-African means to me, it means that my people are taken care of. Like we are taken care of. We take back what was stolen from us. And we're able to envision together what we want to see like happen for our people. And so much was robbed from us. So much was stolen from us. But we know what we want. We want liberation. We want our people to be connected. And so like I deeply resonate seeing myself as African, like I'm African, and seeing my people. And I think the other thing about it is a lot of Africans in this country only know what's going on here and maybe not even in depth of how capitalism works. But think about what's happening in Africa with our people, in Libya, in the Congo, everywhere in Africa where our people are being harmed. We should care. And that's what Pan-Africanism means to me, is I'm caring about all my people, no matter where they are. I'm connected to all of them, no matter if they're in the Caribbean, no matter if they're in Cuba, no matter if they're in this country or in Africa. Like I care about my people, and it is important that we all are liberated. And so for me, that's what Pan-African means, is like I'm connected. We're this one collective village, and we're taking care of one another. And we're going to be able to do that with taking back what is ours. They're not going to gift it back to us. There's no policy. There's no president. There's no leader. It's going to be us. It's going to be us as a community, including our children, right? Including our young people, including our elders. So that's what it means to me.
Right, that was beautiful. And I agree 100% with everything you said. Like, Pan-Africanism gives me a sense of like a collective identity, like a sense of like a nation, to be honest with you. Like living in the United States as an African person, you are taught that you're an American citizen. But when you look at like the day-to-day condition of African people in the United States and what we have to do to even get like the title of citizen, like it's very, very clear that we are not on the same level as other so-called citizens. It is very, very clear, like even to eat at a lunch counter, to take the bus, to like get a job, to read. It had to be like a bloody collective struggle of our people to get the most basic rights in this context. None of that was given to us. We had to fight for it every single step of the way, every single step. And to this day, we are still denied access to jobs. We are still denied access to housing. We are still systematically forced out of the global economy. We are still demonized and lied about in the media. We are still shot down in the street on a daily basis all over the nation by police or by just like random Europeans with guns. So it's like very, very clear that even though we are like on paper supposed to be citizens, Like, the reality of the situation is that we are not given the same rights as other citizens within this nation. And that's true of, like, indigenous people as well. That's true of colonized people as well. And, like, what Pan-Africanism did for me was to say that you don't have to be yoked to this place that was built by enslaving your ancestors, by torturing your ancestors. There is no part of your identity or your history or your future that must be tied to this empire that was born in, like, a tide of blood. Like, the United States would not exist without massive acts of violence against indigenous peoples, against African peoples, against this entire hemisphere. Like, it straight up would not exist. It would not continue to exist without continuing out that violence against Africa, against African people, against indigenous people. Like, it's just built on violence. It's built on torture. It's built on rape. It's built on theft. And so understanding that I, as a person colonized by this place, do not have to identify with this place, do not have to have a future that's tied with this place is, like, extremely powerful to me. And then on top of that, like, look at what Africa is. We already said it's, like, the most resource-rich landmass on the face of the planet. It has the highest concentration of precious minerals. It has the vastest quantity of arable land. Arable land means, like, food, like land that you can grow food on. Africa has the most. Africa has the most fresh water. Africa has the youngest and fastest growing labor force on the entire planet. And on top of all of that, Africa is beautiful. Africa is like once you go, like, you can't get it out of your heart. Like, it's just like, as soon as you step off the plane, it's, like, immediately apparent that that's where we came from. Like, I remember the first time I was in Ghana with APRP, and I remember we were, like, walking around, and I was, like, looking at the people, and, like, they act like us. Like, they, like, sit on the stoop and, like, shoot shit. They, like, laugh really loud. They get, like, it seems like they're fighting, but they're just, like, talking. Like, it's just, like, I'm like, these are clearly our people. And, like, even, like, looking at them, right, I was like, that looks like my neighbor. That looks like my cousin. Like, they look like us. They look like us. They act like us because they are us. That is our land. That is our home. It is being destroyed to prop up this empire that ain't shit. It's never been shit. It will never be shit. It was built with murder and theft. It maintains itself through murder and theft. And it's looting Africa to prop itself up when Africa belongs to us. So just knowing that there's, like, this whole beautiful place that has, like, this vast, incredible history. Like, the contributions that African people have made to civilization, have made to humanity as a whole, are not discussed because Europeans have straight lied on us and we internalize that. But we're reading The World in Africa by W.B. Dubois right now, and he's talking about Africa was the continent that gave the world iron, that showed the world how to work with iron. Like, we started the Iron Age. I didn't know that till I read that book. Like, there's so many contributions and so much incredible history and so much knowledge and wealth in this place that we come from that I have no idea whatsoever why anyone would say, oh, I'm not African, I'm American. This is a sinking ship. This is going down. It's like circling the drain frame. Like, I'm not tying myself to this. Are you serious? So just the idea that I am, like, one of billions of people with, like, the same history tied to the same context, with the same struggle, the struggle that is, like, just, a struggle that is, like, right, a struggle that will not just liberate ourselves, but will help liberate all of humanity. Like, I am gonna tie myself to that. That seems like the best future plan for me. But yeah, like, that's what Pan-African means for me as an African woman, as an African person.
That's beautiful. I love it. I love it. That's so beautiful. I'm just, like, letting those words go into my soul. So beautiful. Yeah. We're going to move into the next subject. We're going to talk about COVID-19 New Mexico updates. If y'all didn't know, now you know, New Mexico is a hot spot with tons of new cases happening per day. So an average case, we're having about 630 cases per day. There are some times where it's been over 800 new cases per day. So there's been over 38,000 cases, positive cases, and unfortunately 950 deaths. The New York Times actually just put an article out this week about New Mexico because that's how much a hot spot we are. So in prisons and jails, right, where, remember, our governor's been being celebrated about the low numbers. In prisons and jails, 2,768 positive documented cases. We know there's more. And 9 people in prison have died. Continuously throughout the pandemic, the number of prison and jail cases have been on a rise that's never stopped. And very few people have been released. There have been organizations calling for the release of people behind the walls because of the spread of COVID-19. And who is bringing it in there? The CEOs. And why are you locking up people during a pandemic? So we have the federal, we have Operation Relentless Pursuit, Operation Legend, all these operations targeting our people, locking people up. Why are you locking people up during a pandemic? That's a mess. And so, but most people who are spreading it is these CEOs who aren't wearing masks in the prisons. And we know that. And they're not providing people with soap. They're just leaving people to die if they are tested positive, leaving people to suffer. And it's in the New York Times. Also, in New Mexico, we have very few beds. We have 2,339 beds. 81% of those beds are filled, and 183 of those cases, those beds are filled with people who have positive coronavirus cases, and they're being treated. And unfortunately, some of them will not make it because that's how dangerous and deadly the coronavirus is. I could not believe this state opened up, no matter how small our numbers were. It's a pandemic. All the other states, even Texas opened up and we saw the numbers skyrocket. Georgia opened up, numbers skyrocket. So we decide to open up and do indoor dining in a restaurant with no circulated air. Right. Why? Why would we decide to do that? So, and we know that also restaurants are considered the top source of the spreading of the coronavirus. Do not do indoor dining. That is dangerous. That's how the coronavirus is spreading. So the governor made an announcement on a few things that they're going to be doing. So if there's 4 cases diagnosed within a restaurant, they have to close for 2 weeks. So that's breweries, salons, restaurants, and gyms. And now restaurants and breweries, by the end of the month, they have to do spot testing of employees. They have to take a log of everyone that dines in their restaurant to help do contract tracing. So if you're dining in a restaurant, they're going to be documenting that you are there. Yeah. Another example of capitalism, right? Instead of just making sure that people have money to survive, they're just trying to keep restaurants open and all these things open so people have access to money, right? And very little money, because we know that people are poor to working poor in New Mexico. So it's just risking people's lives, right? These restaurants staying open instead of this government providing the adequate resources for people to stay home during a pandemic and make sure their bills are paid. We're in a pandemic, wear a mask, wash your hands, social distancing, don't leave your home unless you need to leave it. We're still in a pandemic and it's getting worse, and it's going to get worse as it gets cold. Yeah. Yep. 100%. That's what I got for that.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd add, that was very thorough. This governor was praised. She got to speak at the Democratic National Convention because she was doing a so-called good job. We called on the show before, those numbers were being artificially kept low. They were being artificially kept low. They were not testing people in these prisons in the numbers they needed to be. They were denying access to tests with people with no symptoms. They were keeping the numbers low on purpose. And so I'm very sure that what we are living through right now is just the chickens coming home to roost. That's what happens under capitalism. They try to sweep stuff under the rug. They pretend everything's fine. So the money will keep coming in. And eventually, it blows up in their face. This is what happens every single time. This is what New Mexico is living through. This is why we say that regardless of the party, whether they are Democrat or Republican, the fundamental reason why they are in office is to maintain capitalism, is to protect capitalism, even at the expense of lives. And so that is what's happening in New Mexico right now. But this is going to be an abbreviated show. We have to wrap it up right now. But we thank you so much for joining us, for tuning in to the show. We deeply appreciate all of your comments and your eyes and your shares. This happens every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, which means we will be back next Thursday with another political education topic. We hope you will join us. We hope that if you are watching and you're not an organization, that you will join an organization fighting for justice, get off the sidelines, get in the battle, help us liberate humanity, help us save the planet from catastrophic climate change and pandemics. And thank you so much for watching. My name is Onyesamu. This is Monica. Stay ready for revolution. Thank you so much.